What's up, guys? Eric here, Driveline World's OK steering wheel holder, and I'm enjoying some absolutely perfect, beautiful weather. Man, it is just perfect. Like 67 degrees, I'm loaded. Headed to a 90 to drop off this load and then move on to whatever's next. But as I mentioned in my last live video, I asked AI to give me some information about inflation as it relates to the average gross of a truck, of a solo truck, and that would be the thing that I would talk about in the next video. So that's what I'm going to do in this video. I'm going to go for a little bit of a walk here, and then when I get settled back in, I'll read you guys and gals what the end result was of that question to AI, and why I think we're being so utterly devastated right now in the trucking industry. And this is really all industries too. It's just a global economic problem, but obviously I want it to relate to those of us in trucking. We kind of live in this bubble, especially with Prime, where we think it's a problem just for us at Prime, and it's not. It's actually a problem for all of trucking, really bad problem. And then in trucking, we think it's just for trucking, but it's actually happening all over the globe. But I want to give you some numbers that should terrify you quite a bit and hopefully explain it and help you understand it a little bit as well. All right, you guys, couple housekeeping items. First of all, like half the people that watch these videos are not subscribed to the channel. If you haven't done so, please do subscribe. When I'm out running, I do videos probably about every other day, and I've got some really cool things that are coming up in the near future that I'm working on right now. So the channel's generally pretty active, so make sure you hit that subscription button, or tap it, I guess, and that way you'll get the videos when they come up. Also, this goes out early to all the channel members. You can become a member of the channel if you'd like. I'm getting back into the mode this week of doing videos just for members, but members of the channel get the video usually the night before everybody else. And then finally, in the description down below is a link to the Discord. If you want to be active in the Discord, you can join us over there too. So, as I mentioned in my last live, and I tried to show a picture of this, it didn't really come through really well. In fact, someone said it showed backwards, and that may be possible. But I want to read this to you, because here's why this is really important. And let me first speak to all the people who drive for Prime or pull Prime freight right now. It's very easy to view everything from inside the Prime bubble. And I see lots of YouTube videos about this. I see lots of conversation on, Discord and out there in social media. Not on Facebook. I don't even have a Facebook account. I can't stand that toxicity. Don't want anything to do with it. But elsewhere in social media, I see a lot of Prime drivers having this kind of conversation, and they want to put blame on Prime as the company, or blame certain decisions that Prime makes for things being difficult on the drivers financially. And sure, there could be some things that, look, at the end of the day, Prime is tightening its belt. And unfortunately, a lot of the things that Prime is doing to tighten its belt is going to put us in a position of having to shoulder some of that financial liability. That just is what it is. Now, what y'all need to understand, fellow Prime drivers, is that is not just Prime. So that's the whole industry. I highly recommend, if you're on X, go follow Craig Fuller from FreightWaves, and then watch the people that he's retweeting, because he's the CEO of FreightWaves. He has a whole team of analysts, and he has his own data platform that's tracking all freight. It's tracking cargo ships, it's tracking rail, all of it. So he's got a pretty good grasp of what's going on in the industry, but follow some of these guys that have real good access to everything and are out there kind of just letting us know, drip, drip, here's what's going on. Subscribe to FreightWaves, and you'll see that the whole freight industry is currently being absolutely devastated. It's not just Prime, guys. It's not just Prime. And in fact, Prime is probably performing better than most trucking companies. Now, we don't know that for a fact because Prime is a private company. But most trucking companies are barely hanging on. And there's a lot of trucking companies that are filing for bankruptcy and going out of business, a lot that have over the past year, and a lot that are going to continue over the next few months and the next year or two. A lot of trucking companies are even operating at a loss right now. They're not making any money. And they're operating at that loss with the hopes that at some point in the near future, things will turn back to the upside and they can dig themselves out of the hole. But they're operating in the hole. So there's devastation across all of freight right now. And there's a lot of reasons for that. But one of the things that is really just taking a sledgehammer to all of it and making it so much worse is inflation. That I think we underestimate because it's kind of like this Overton window. And if you're not familiar with the Overton window, go look up the concept and the theory. It's really important to kind of understand the shift of this Overton window where inflation occurs, where you see this 3% and 5% and 7%, and then you'll see that 7% drop to 4%, and somehow in your head you're thinking, okay, well that means inflation's going backwards. But that's not what it means. What that means is for that month or that quarter, instead of the price of everything inflating at 7%, the price of everything only inflated at 3%, but it's still inflated. So over the course of the years, or the last few years, the inflation has been astronomical. I think it's even worse than what these numbers are going to show. But let's take these numbers at face value. And we'll be conservative and we'll operate under these numbers and not assume that it's greater than these numbers, which I believe it is. But let's just take these numbers, okay? So when you want to blame the Trans Am acquisition or anything like that for things that are going on at Prime, there's a much bigger scenario at play here that involves all of freight, and it goes way outside of freight and involves a lot of different industries in the entire global economy. It's not just Prime, you guys. So don't let yourself get into this mindset of it's Prime versus us and they're just screwing us over. Just like every other company. I mean, what good is it to us if Prime is not able to sustain itself? Okay. I'm not saying that to just give it a pass on some of the things that are happening. I'm just saying we don't know the whole pictures. We don't know the books. We don't know what's under the hood. We don't know the engine. We don't know all those details. What good is it for us if Prime can't sustain itself and continue? So you don't know. And if you don't know, don't point all the blame. Obviously, I'm pretty constructive. I try to be constructively critical, but I'm fairly critical on a lot of things. And that's because I kind of take some of it personal. And that's because I've been pulling Prime Freight for 6 years. And I've seen this other side of it where it felt like a lot more of the, financial wins and losses were kind of shared. And I don't feel like right now the financial losses are being shared. But that's another video, okay? My whole point is what we're experiencing at Prime. If you're experiencing slow freight, if you're experiencing what you think are rates that are not that great, If you're having a difficult time making money in trucking, you understand that the whole freight industry is experiencing this. And in a lot of areas, it's a lot worse, okay? So all that said, let me show you some numbers to help you understand not the 3 and 7% monthly or quarterly inflation, but the greater picture, okay? So in the end of 2018 and through 2019, I don't know if I would say it was the average, but I would say it was certainly reasonable. And going into 2020 for a solo truck running prime freight to do 4,500, 5,000 gross a week is pretty reasonable to, aim for that if you're running hard and your loads are staying consistent. 5,000 in a week gross in 2019 was not unreasonable. And if you were hitting that gross of 5,000 per week, you were doing pretty well. Now, it was way better during COVID, but that's because there was the COVID thing and everybody had all this extra money being thrown at them. There was a lot of things going on in the economy that were not natural. But let's go pre-COVID. Pre-COVID, $5,000 a month. In fact, going into 2019, coming out of 2018, like my trainer, he would always say to me, yeah, basically when I'm a solo truck, I'm going to assume that I'm going to net half of what my gross is going to be over a certain amount. So if he was going to gross $5,000 to his truck, without really getting into the nitty gritty, he could assume that his net was going to be $2,500 that week, pre-tax, but that would be his net. That was the case for me too, going into 2019, and kind of the way I operated really for several years. I could pretty much assume that my net was going to be half of what my gross was. Even when running it as a team with my wife, she was paid as a company driver, but all that, both of our incomes came to the one household. But anyway, my net was basically going to be half. That's not the case right now. So I see a lot of these questions of, well, why is that? Why are we getting ripped off, or why is, blah, blah. Okay. So I asked ChatGPT, I said, well, what would $5,000 winter of 2018, 2019 translate to today? What would it need to be today in order to have that same buying power of $5,000 back then? Okay. So it says to determine the value of 5,000 US dollars from 2018 adjusted for inflation to April of 2025, we can use the inflation data provided by the Bureau of Labor Statistics Consumer Price Index. In other words, this is like legit. This is why I said we're going to go with their numbers at face value. I think it's worse, but we're going to go with this. According to the data, the CPI in 2018 was 251.23, and in 2025 it is 319.79. The total inflation rate from 2018 to 2025 is calculated as 27.29%. In other words, let's call it 28%. I know it would round down to 27%, but let's just go with 28%. In fact, I would really like to say 30% because that's a lot of the stuff that I price out, like washouts, truck washes, load locks, gloves, all that stuff. Truck payments for trucks ordered, it seems to be right at that 30% number, but whatever. So it gives the formula here, and then it goes down to this final conclusion. So 5,000 US dollars from 2018 would be worth approximately $6,364 in April of 2025 when adjusted for inflation. Okay, so in other words, your gross for a solo truck right now, and if you're not with Prime and your gross is different, maybe you're running specialized freight, maybe you don't get all the discounts and fuel discounts, maybe you're running dry freight, whatever. Just go back and look and see what your gross to a solo truck was in 2018 or 2019, and then ask for an inflation adjustment, and that's what your truck should be grossing now in order for you to have the same buying power in the winter of 2018 to 2019. So to have the same buying power for this solo truck. Now, I would need to be averaging $6,400 gross. Yet what I'm trying to do right now is just get past 5,000. I'm like, if I'm hitting 5,000, that's what I want to. So my goal right now, with the freight industry being what it is each week, is to hit 5,000, which is the same goal I had in 2019. And I'm lucky if I can hit 5,000. Sometimes it's a lot higher, sometimes it's lower. But I really strive to kind of exceed 5,000. But in other words, I'm in this freight industry, I'm feeling fortunate and lucky, and I know a lot of you are too, if I hit the same gross that I had in 2019. Yet, really, in order to make the same money or have the same buying power as that we had at the beginning of 2019, I'd need to be doing 6,400 every week. That ain't happening. That's not happening. You're not, as a solo truck in this freight market, if you're running reefer freight, it is very unlikely that you're getting $6,400 a week. So basically you've lost 30% of your overall net financial outcome. So, I mean, it's like it's taking a 30% haircut. It's taking a 30% pay cut, basically. I mean, it's not as simple as just giving some numbers, but let's say you were making $100,000. Remove inflation from the picture, it would be like making $100,000 and then suddenly making $70,000. You lose $30,000 in income. That's kind of what's happened. Now, this obviously it doesn't really work that way. It's more of loss of your buying power, your purchase power. But that's kind of what's happened here. And what's making this personal and frustrating for all of us is that while we're going through this, we're watching all these companies and corporations say, hey, we really have to tighten our belt to survive this. And that's true. I don't disagree with that. But the next part of that is, so you're going to have to take less. You're going to have to shoulder this so that we can survive. Meanwhile, all of us out here are going, how do we survive? How do we make it? We can't pass this on to someone else. We can't say we're going to make this someone else's problem so that we can survive. We are the end point. We're the bottom. We're where the buck stops. So it's devastating, guys. It is truly devastating, and there's no end in sight. In fact, it could get worse before it gets any better. It may be likely that it gets worse before it gets any better. Because there's some things that have to happen that I think need to happen globally. And unfortunately, in order for those things to happen globally, we got to go through some pain here. There's still a fly here from that damn Tyson plant. So it's just, my point of this video is that it's not helpful to just rail at the carrier that you're pulling freight for and try to say that it's us versus them and they're just trying to screw us over. Be that Prime, or if you're on the spot market, if it's a broker or whatever the case may be. I'm not saying I'm not saying just wave the white flag and give in. I'm just saying the problem is much bigger than that. It's not that simple. And a lot of the conversation I'm seeing is trying to force it to be that simple. And it's not. This is something that just a lot of people around the world are experiencing, and a lot of people in our industry, most of our industry is experiencing, and it's certainly not just Prime. So, if you're a Prime driver, there's a lot to be constructively critical towards Prime about. But it's not Prime just trying to screw us over. It's not that simple. It's Prime trying to survive And we're going to have to pay some of that price. And while we're paying the price for everything else, while we're paying the price for Congress kicking the can down the road, while we're paying the price for other countries having eaten our lunch on trade for decades, all this stuff that's happened for the last 5 or 6 years, the last decade, the last decades before that, Republicans, Democrats, all of it, now is the time where the bill's being called, and we're all dealing with it. So my advice is you're gonna have to, like, we all have to learn to operate within this new reality. None of us are gonna be able to snap our fingers and make it change. We're not bitching about it and just hoping somebody sees our post and says, oh, we should probably not do this because someone out there is upset about it. That's not the reality we're in. The reality we're in is everybody's fucked. And everybody has to figure out how to make it through this. That's the reality we're in. So I don't know if that's very positive, but I just wanted to share those inflation numbers with you guys, because that is, if you're wondering why you weren't making the money that you were 5 years ago, it's because you're actually making about the same money you were 5 years ago, but your money's worth less, 30% less. At least according to this, 26, 27% less, but it's probably 30% or more less. You've taken a 30% decrease in pay, whether you wanted to or not, whether you liked it or not. And that sucks. That sucks. So, but, again, figure it out. Got to figure it out. Learn to operate in that new reality. And if you can, you might survive it. If you can't, you're not going to survive it. You're not going to make it. There's a lot that aren't making it right now. And just you're not going to be able to force it to be a different scenario through sheer will. All right, guys, I got to get on to my receiver here and get this load delivered and figured out what's next. So be safe, make good decisions, always drive, thrive. I'll talk to you all soon.